I think I encountered a skinwalker. I want to preface before that I've always somewhat believed in these type of creatures. Aliens, skinwalkers, wendigos, spirits, etc. But I've always been the kind of person who doesn't 100% believe or not in something. I've just always believed that it's possible. So why not? But of course, just like anyone else who hasn't experienced something, I had my doubts. Also, I wanted to add that I am not the type to be scared of entities. When it comes to what I believe and how I see spirits, I am never scared of them. I understand them and I have always connected with them. Last night I was with my partner and our friend, and we were at a place called Rafe's Chasms in Gloucester, Massachusetts. We got there at about 9:30 p.m., and we were just going to have a fire on the rocks by the water. You had to walk through some wooded area to get to the rocks, and as we pulled up to the area, I had a bad feeling for some reason, and usually trust my intuition, but I told myself I was just psyching myself out. Once we got to the spot, I immediately felt a weird feeling, but again I told myself I was just making things up. Even so, I didn't turn my back to the open space, and I was turned facing towards the woods/rock area. As the people I were with watched the fire, I stared out into the darkness, feeling like something was watching us. I decided to go to a rock further away from the fire so my eyes could adjust to the darkness. And lo and behold, I see a translucent white figure about 50 feet away from us on top of the rocks on the other side of the area, pretty high up. It was moving back and forth, and it looked about 5-6 feet tall. It starts to scale down the rocks, and when I say scale, I mean fast, like faster than humanly possible, and as it's doing that, it gets smaller and turns into the shape of an animal like a coyote or wolf. I say, "Is that an animal?" And my partner looks over and immediately gets super sketched out just as I was. The other person we were with wasn't bothered by it for some reason. He said he saw it, but in the moment was trying to convince us it was a person. He was drunk. As I see it coming towards us, I get absolutely horrified that it's going to kill us. I tried to go up higher on the rocks to get away from it. I literally thought that was it. I thought I was going to die. I had the most horrifying feeling, and it was genuinely the scariest, most terrifying thing I have ever felt or seen. I pulled out my phone and shined my flashlight on it to make sure I'm not tripping, and I think that it deterred whatever it was away from us because it ended up running into the woods and disappearing. My partner and I were completely horrified, and my legs were violently shaking. I said that we need to leave immediately. The friend that we were with wanted to stay to finish his drink, but we wanted to go. He told us that he would prove that it was a human by trying to run down the rocks as fast as he could, to prove that a human could go that fast. But when he did, we could hear him running around. And that's the scary part about what we saw. It was completely silent as it went down the rocks and back up them. We weren't able to process what had happened until we had gotten home after we dropped our friend off. When we did, we decided to do some research about skinwalkers and the area where we were. Here's what we found. The first few things that come up when you Google Rafe's Chasm in Gloucester is several articles of deaths that have occurred right where we were. Now each one states that the deaths were from the waves knocking the people off and drowning them. But this wasn't what freaked us out. I continued to scroll, and I came across this weird website. It was a website for stock photos, but for some reason the description included the name of the location we were. When I clicked the website, I literally could not believe what I saw. The image of whatever creature that is looked a lot like what we had seen earlier that night. We still have no idea what to make of this situation, but all I know is I am still scared. Also, needed to add that earlier in the night I heard an owl, and I made sure I said something about it to my friend and partner because I love owls. I just heard one hoo. I later in the night read that an owl is the eyes for the walkers, which is very interesting. Something weird that happened last night while helping out a friend get home. Haven't used Reddit in a while. Mainly use Twitter nowadays for my social media urges, but I didn't really know where else to put this, so I'm making a return. Last night I got a call from a military buddy that he was looking for a ride home from the bar and didn't want to spend $30 on an Uber ride. I said sure, I was hungover myself and figured it would help to drive with the windows down and get some air. It was probably 12:30 a.m. and I was driving around my neighborhood trying to take an alternate route that I hadn't taken before but knew about. basically one that went through residential areas and stayed off of the bigger, more populated routes. I didn't really want to fight traffic the entire way getting downtown. So as I'm driving, everything was normal. I was listening to some random podcast about World War II. But then as I'm passing this one random house a couple streets down from mine, there's a kid standing in the front yard right on the edge of the road. TBH, this doesn't sound that weird, but looking back, it was past midnight and this kid was maybe 10. 11 years old? He had on a red shirt, tan shorts and sneakers with a blonde bowl cut. Totally normal looking kid. So as I'm coming up to this kid, I get to a speed bump and had slowed down so I was able to get a better look at him. He wasn't playing, he wasn't running around. No other kids were with him. He was just standing completely still and meeting my gaze as I'm going past. Like, the entire way down the street, he doesn't stop staring. And after I had passed him, I keep looking at my rearview mirror, and he still doesn't stop looking. He doesn't cross the street or go back to playing around. He just keeps standing there, staring at my truck. On the drive back, I told my friend after picking him up about the kid, and he was interested. So I took him back through the same way where I saw the kid. This time he wasn't there. Fast forward to when me and my friend get back to my place and we hear this super fast, quiet knocking at the door. Like so quiet my AC almost completely smothered the sound. It's like 1:30 a.m. at this point, and both my roommates are out of town for the long weekend, so I was kind of weary of answering the door. I peek out the window next to the front door and see no one there. Honestly, this could have just been a tree limb hitting the roof near the front door, but in that moment it was like I was having a heart attack thinking I'd see that kid there. Later, when I was in bed just laying there, I heard a few more random knocks in different places. My bedroom is right next to the front door and goes out onto the patio that the front door connects to. These knocks could have been at the front door or just in some random spot in the house. At this point, I was so tired I really didn't care to worry. I bet and passed out. Waking up this morning thinking about it, those knocks creeped me out a bit more, but just doing a walkthrough of my front patio, nothing was out of the regular, so there's not much else to go on. I know this really isn't the most bone-chilling story, but kinda goes to show how kids can be so creepy with zero effort. Vermont Humanoid. Okay, so I'll try to make this relatively short. So, I'm not one for believing too much of cryptid lore, never had an encounter before or anything like that. But my partner and I live on the border of upstate New York, not far from the Whitehall Bigfoot area. One night, partner was taking out the garbage and came back inside, startled. I mean, really shook up. They said they had seen a creature that looked like maybe a fox or coyote, but that it then stood up on its hind legs, and so they booked it back inside. Fast forward about a month and I'm outside on my porch smoking a cigarette, enjoying the stars under a crystal clear sky. We have a small plot next to our house that has a tow-behind landscaping trailer permanently parked on it, about 20-ish feet away from the house. After a while of standing outside, I get the sudden and intense feeling like something is watching me, just that primal feeling of danger. It should be noted that, like most people up here, I'm usually carrying a gun on me. Coyotes and bears are fairly common up here, so I kind of do the four corners check of my surroundings. When I looked over to that trailer, I saw there was something the size of a large dog laying in the grass. Mind you, it's a clear night with a not quite full moon, and the grass was uncut long, but not like a meadow. If I had to estimate, I'd say 7-9 inches high, so I had a really good view of this thing. Now, I know never to approach a random animal bedded down at night, so I just kind of watch it for a second. Even in the light of the moon, its outline and coat were pitch black, blacker than anything I've seen before, unnaturally contrasting against the ground it laid on. Then it looks up. It has piercing red eyes. I'm thinking, oh, what the fuck, and put my hand on my revolver. I ain't about to be coyote food. And then, it stood up. It fucking stood up on its hind legs. The only way I can describe the legs of it is like that goat-human hybrid from the Narnia movie, but with the torso like a hybrid of man and canine. It was taller than me, and I'm 6'1". It didn't even need to take a step. I flicked whatever was left of my cigarette and backed away to the door, locked and bolted it, and spent the rest of the night wondering what I just saw. Now I'll admit, I'm a religious man, but that thing didn't fit the description of any jinn I've heard of. It's to this day one of the few things in my life I cannot explain. We've installed security cameras since, but now the lot is under construction, and we haven't seen it since. IDK what I saw that night, truly. But I intend to find out one way or another. I want to go into the forest near the plot and look for signs. Does anyone have any advice on hunting this sort of cryptid? I'll update with any further happenings should they appear again. Encounter in the 1970s. This is an encounter that my mother and my uncle experienced as kids in the 1970s in Tijuana, MX. When I was younger, my mom and my uncle would tell this story to us, and I always thought it was a ghost story. But recently I've been thinking it was an encounter. Please let me know if you had a similar experience and if you believe their story was an encounter as well. My mom lived with her older sister, older brother, and mom in a very old apartment complex. The complex was owned by my mother's aunt, but my grandma would run it to make money. The apartment complex was pretty large, and the one only bathroom they had was pretty far away from where they would sleep. My grandma took over a couple of the rooms on one side of the complex, since they weren't being rented. There were around 4 rooms, and they were being used as storage. One room was a bedroom, and my mom couldn't recall what the other rooms had. In the actual apartment that was next to those rooms, they had a kitchen, a TV, and a room where they all slept together. Because the building was pretty old, most of the rooms didn't have light, but the actual apartment did. Since the bathroom was really far, my grandma would have my mom and her brother bring in a urine bucket at night. But since back then there was barely any lights, the nights would be very dark, and it would make my uncle and mom super nervous. They would have to carry with them a cable light. So then one night, again my grandma forced them to go get the pee bucket, and they both nervously hurried to go get it while carrying the cable light. They got the bucket out the room, and as they were heading back, my uncle noticed a firelight in the patio, and immediately shields my mom and starts shaking. My mom, confused, tries to see what it is. The way she described it is like a fire-like projection, but not red, more like a whiter fire. They both run to try to go back to the main apartment, but their older sister, to mess with them, locked the door and wouldn't let them in. My uncle, out of fear, takes off, leaving my mom behind. My mom was so scared and peed herself. Out shock and fear, she falls to the floor and observed a shadow creature running out the light. She described this creature around a kid's size. She noticed its eyes, but it said, although they were bigger, they weren't exaggerated, just bigger. For the color, she said it was like a grayish, translucent color. My uncle, as he was running out, trips over a stair and then watched the shadow run out until it disappears. Once my mom's sister finally lets them in, they couldn't stop crying. They couldn't sleep or talk. They were traumatized for years. My grandma would try to make them explain. Other people believed that my grandma needed to dig a hole on the patio because the shadowy creature might have let them know there's a treasure. My grandma believed that if she dig a hole, she would find something bad. So that's it. For a while, my mom and her brother weren't the same. And then when they finally were able to talk about it, my mom realized it wasn't her imagination. I think this story is really interesting, because usually an experience like this happens to one person, but 2 kids, perhaps they really did see that shadowy gray light creature. Blue light and footsteps. A few years ago, 2 friends and I went backpacking in Rainbow Lakes in Idaho. The trip started on June 16, 2022. We drove up the mountain to the trailhead and no one was there. We were probably 15 miles from the next person. As we hiked up the saddle of the mountain and into the next valley, there was what sounded like someone hitting a tree with a branch as we entered the trees. There was still plenty of snow under the trees with no trail visible. We had a GPS, however, so finding the lake was no issue. This also made it difficult for anyone to know where we were. We walked over deep snow and made it to the campground fine. The whole time we walked, though, I felt weird. There was no sound other than our steps and the occasional creak. I disregarded this, however, because of all the snow. We set up camp and had one tent for all of us, a cramped 3-man. One friend and I had plans to build and stay in a shelter, which we soon made. As it got dark and heavy wind started to come through, the only light was the coals getting stoked by the wind. But soon there was a blue light on the tops of the trees. I looked out of the shelter to see a blue light source go across the sky without any sound, no more than 50 feet above the trees right over us. My friends had seen the light as well. We got spooked, and soon all of us were in the tent. While trying to fall asleep, I started to hear footsteps around our campsite. I'm no mountain man, but I'm also not new to the outdoors, and I knew that whatever it was had 2 legs and not 4. The strides were long and slow, stopping around our campsite and even getting a couple feet from the door of the tent. I was too scared to move a muscle, except get my hand up to close my exposed ear. All it did was pace around for about 45 minutes, stopping periodically. The wind was still blowing and pushed in the tent with a couple gusts. At some point, the footsteps trailed off, and I woke up that morning feeling terrible. I asked my friends if they heard it as well, and one of them corroborated my story. The other slept through the whole thing. I opened the tent to make breakfast and heard a crack up on the mountain, most likely unrelated. We searched for footprints and found some, but what was weird is there wasn't enough. We only found 3, 1 solitary and the 2 in a stride, probably 4 feet apart. The problem is that they were in snow and there were no other footprints remotely close to them, so we disregarded them. That morning we all had a feeling of dread, and once again there wasn't a sound. The friend that slept through it was the least scared, and when he went up on the hill to take a dump, he looked down to see 2 trees moving opposite of each other, like something was shaking them. There wasn't any wind anymore, and only those trees moved. I said we should pack up and get out as soon as we could, as we were supposed to stay there 2 nights. They agreed, and the whole way back, and ever since waking up, we felt we were being watched. As we left the trees, we heard a single smack against a tree like we did on the way in, but the rest of the trip went smoothly. Any ideas as to what it could have been? Potential skinwalker sighting. Some context. This happened 9 years ago in the early spring when I was 15 years old. I was at a friend's house in corn country about an hour north of Indianapolis. Nowadays, I am very familiar with the paranormal, unexplained, having multiple shared experiences with friends. But at the time I was a major skeptic. I had not even heard of skinwalkers. I didn't fully process what we saw until years later. I came over to my friend's house to hang out like any other time. I brought my pellet gun. He had one as well, so we could shoot some moles on his farm property. After a while, his brother joined us and we eventually got bored of looking for moles. There was a patch of woods about the size of 2 football fields a little over a mile away, completely surrounded by empty cornfields with no access points from the nearby road. The 3 of us decided to walk out there because, why not? We were bored kids looking for fun. We put on some boots and headed out with our pellet guns. The walk wasn't super far, but it took us a while to reach the woods because all the spring rain from earlier in the week made the empty field a big mud pit. So muddy your foot disappears each step. Then right as we walked through the brush surrounding the edge of the woods, we saw it. The best way I can describe this thing is it was a raccoon that was built like a Great Dane. We had seen coyotes and wolves before, and this was not that. It 100% looked like the biggest raccoon we had ever seen. We could tell we caught it off guard because it was just standing there on all 4s grooming itself, and then it immediately locked eyes with us when one of us pointed at it and said, "Look at that thing." There was a couple of seconds where we just looked at it as it looked back at us before it quickly turned around and scaled a 60-foot tree. We lost sight of it in the canopy. We then looked at each other and were like, WTF was that? And talked about how the way it climbed the tree was what freaked us out the most. It only took a few strides up the tree, using its front 2 paws to grab a spot on the tree to lift and launch itself up the tree. The arms were freakishly long and lanky looking when it climbed. It honestly looked somewhat human the way it articulated its arms as it climbed. Like its elbows jutted out to the sides as it pulled itself up. We talked about how freaky that was some more and decided to keep looking around because even though we were spooked, it was intriguing. And we wanted to see if there was any other freaky stuff around. There definitely was. The woods were littered with easily over 100 animal carcasses, bone piles. Most of them were cows, raccoons, and opossums. There was one spot, maybe 25x25 ft, that had at least a dozen cow carcasses ranging from just the bone left to one that looked less than a week old. They were definitely being eaten by something with huge chunks of flesh being missing. I know cows get loose all the time, but damn if this didn't look like a feeding spot. My theory is this thing was stealing cows from local farms for food. There are a couple within 5 miles. We also found a man-made small pond near the middle of the woods. Couldn't have been more than 6 feet wide. There was a shovel and plastic bucket sitting next to it. Once we found that, we're pretty freaked out again and decided we better head back because we had less than 2 hours of daylight left. And there was a lot of thick, deep mud to slowly walk through to get back. That's pretty much it. At the time it freaked me out a bit, but looking back now, knowing what skinwalkers are, I'm just happy we came back completely unscathed. Unfortunately, I don't hang out with those guys anymore, and I tried to go back with some different friends somewhat recently, only to see that the woods had been cleared out, and there was nothing there. I thought I was tripping out, but I looked on Google Earth and I could see in its place was dirt and log piles. Probably an omen to not chase this thing. I'll take it at face value. Do you guys think this was a skinwalker or just an apex raccoon?